Worth? Adam Worth was a famous criminal from the late 1800s, commonly referred to as the Napoleon of crime. This unsub obviously sees himself in the same light.
There's only 6 keys. That means 2 keys will be used twice. Each key is a letter. Likely corresponds to a number on the lock. 7, 7th letter in the alphabet's G. Z, U, double... Zugzwang. This seems too easy. Zugzwang also means a dilemma in chess where the best move is not to move at all. Wait, don't get up! It's a pressure sensor.
Up until now, he's been an equal opportunity, anger, retaliatory sadist. Most likely because his own marriage failed in a humiliating way. His wife left him for a man she may be engaged or even already married.
You're presuming that the 3 different car companies represented in this room track our drivers via their GPS. That's a bold presumption.
Actually, it's not bold, and we're presuming nothing. When customers access their GPS for the first time, they scroll to the bottom, they click the box that says agree. They don't realize they've just agreed to allowing their car to communicate its entire driving history with your corporate headquarters. Research purposes only, of course. The only reason these people agree to share this information with you is because they don't take the time to read the fine print. But I do. Ecstasy can be made in pill, powder, and liquid form. It wouldn't be that hard to slip something into someone's drink or to convince them the pill they're taking is safe. You know, the medium of his kill is interesting. He's picking a drug that's known for its euphoric effect. It's like he wants to take that happiness away. The delayed onset of the drug caused the victims to OD themselves. MDMA costs more to make than methamphetamine, so it's common practice to mix the two in creating ecstasy in order to maximize profit margin. Griffith Park spans 4,310 acres, making it one of the largest urban parks in all of North America. Given its sheer size, coincidence certainly is a possibility. He abducts his victims from public parks in broad daylight, which tells us that he's socially competent, fits in, appears non-threatening. Like its sister disorder, maternal desire, it stems from the deep-seated need to fill an emotional void left by the loss of a child. This explains why he exhibits so much rage and violence against the nannies that he abducts. He grabbed his first victims from here. He abducted Gina and Phoebe from here. He buried Allison Astor up here, and down here in Hollywood is where Tara Rios was found passed out. I'm actually more intrigued by what lies between these 4 points. Look, dog parks. There's 2 of them. Dog owners tend to be very regimented. They follow a strict schedule. Israel Keys kidnapped a husband and wife at gunpoint, got them in a car, took them to a remote location, and then killed the husband in front of the wife. Solanine's a potent toxin and hallucinogen that comes from the black nightshade plant. The unripe berries were used in the Middle Ages for torture. The effect it has is like a bad acid trip. More recently, it's been used in small doses for asthma. More like an herbalist or a shaman versus a traditional MD. Not unheard of. A number of serial killers have had long intervals of time between kills. BTK, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Keystone Killer, Jack the Ripper, and the Zodiac Killer appear to even stop completely. The removing of heads is an interesting history. In medieval times, it was considered an honorable way to be executed, reserved for noblemen and knights. We call it self-initiated predation cessation. Most serial killers are unable to control their own impulses, but some seem to be able to self-regulate. It's like they have an on-off switch that they themselves can control. According to Chinese mythology, one of the most dreadful punishments in the 18 levels of hell involves having one's tongue ripped out. It's considered to be one of the most horrific forms of torture. His primary motive is to kill. It explains why he didn't take either of his victims to a secondary location. This refers to the cathartic release that comes when he turns someone else's thoughts or fantasies into reality. It's likely these women don't know what the unsub looks like, making it possible for him to interact with them without revealing his true identity. This is an example of projection and polarization, a black and white thinking which, when coupled with impulsivity, anger, and outbursts of violence, indicates that this unsub's most likely suffering from an extreme case of borderline personality disorder, which represents the borderline between anxiety and psychosis. We believe this unsub's perspective has become so warped that he's likely experiencing stress-related paranoid ideation, most likely brought on by a recent traumatic event that triggered that rage. Now that we have 3 working watches, though, we might be able to see a pattern in how or why the unsub changes the times. Let's see. I think I know what the messages say. I'm talking about all the watches. If you take the time the bodies were discovered, subtract the variance the corresponding watches are off by, you land within plus or minus 6 minutes of 6:22 every single time, which, taking into consideration the time between dump and discovery in all the public areas and the fact that the only broken watch we found was already stuck at 6:22, it's reasonable to deduce the unsub sets the watches to the exact same time just before disposing of the bodies. The circular logic dictating its never-ending cycle was not formed overnight. It most likely came about due to years of serious abuse, either emotional, physical, or both. Conversion therapy might. Several conversion camps have been shut down recently because their methods border on torture. It's impossible to tell when or where this photo's taken. It's shot on a telephoto lens and the frame's too small. The photo isn't digital, it's printed on real chromogenic photo paper. The likelihood of a stranger abduction in a neighborhood like this is rare. I've counted 7 turns from the entrance to their driveway. No one just stumbled onto the house. There's no way for us to confirm a DID diagnosis yet, but we do know that he has chronic alcoholism. The interesting thing is his liver and pancreas wouldn't have survived 30 years of that kind of abuse, so there must have been years where he's gotten help. You know, they look like the perfect family, but she would have had to have known about his drinking when they got married. Maybe she was the one that got the prescription. Speed and efficiency of the abduction suggest one unsub. Time and effort it takes to stab someone 40 times takes determination, the sort indicative of someone affected by a past trauma. He's a hemophiliac. It's an antiquated treatment, but some hemophiliacs can inject plasma into their wounds, kickstarting the clotting process that's ineffective in their own system. And he most likely has the more severe version of the disease. It's type B Christmas disease. It was named after the first known case, Stephen Christmas. Most likely works in and around the art community, but not as an artist. Taking care not to damage the eyes, then line of sight is probably what's important to him. If it is about the art, then it's clear the disposal sites are scattered around the Mission District area. It's actually Riemann's hypothesis. It's a mathematical conjecture from the 19th century that states that the Riemann zeta function zeros all line on the critical line. Unsub is bringing fly larvae to the crime scene with him. But he specifically brought a stick with him to the most recent crime scene. It's a ritual that mirrors Russell Smith's very closely. Also, there's something strange about the fly larvae that was found in the car. There's no way it would be found along the Gulf Coast unless it was brought here. I think I know what's going on. DNA from the maggot stomach crop at both crime scenes revealed not only skunk and raccoon meat, but traces of engine oil. I think this unsub is seeding his victims with aged maggots reared on animal remains. You said he acted like he was hallucinating? He has synesthesia. It's a neurological phenomenon in which two or more senses are triggered simultaneously. For instance, someone might associate specific numbers with colors or even be able to taste music. I think Carl has the form of synesthesia in which he can literally see the words that people are speaking. You know, maybe he sees people's words in different colors depending on what type of person he thinks they are. Yeah, but stalking victims vary their routes home. They enter and exit through different doors. They wear disguises. They don't talk to anyone in their driveway. They hardly talk to anyone at all. They're terrorized. You know, if he's making human marionettes, that also explains why he's stuffing his victims into boxes. It's like a sick toy chest. Medieval torturing techniques have a long, dense history. Skinning someone alive was commonplace. From the way these joints were disarticulated, it appears as though we're dealing with either drawing and quartering or the rack. The rack was the most prevalent way to disarticulate the human body. If our unsub's using it, he's beyond maniacal. He's a sadist. Maybe he's dislocating their body parts so that he can manipulate them himself. Think about it for a second. If you add the dislocation, the holes in the hands, the strange clothing, and the odd makeup, I know this sounds crazy, but what if our unsub is turning his victims into human marionettes? The Greeks translated puppets as neurospasta, which literally means string pulling, and throughout time they have been used as a method to tell kings a story so that the subjects didn't have to speak directly to him. So she was dead before being set on fire. Not only does it destroy trace evidence, but it makes it difficult to identify the bodies and determine a common victimology. He's evolved from obliterating his victims with fire to wanting them to be identified while still depersonalizing them. There wasn't any sign of the disinfectant until today, though. Guys, fire, bleach, quell, these are all forms of sterilization. If he's socioeconomically cleansing the streets, he could be treating the homeless population like an infection. To him, they're a virus. The average school bus holds approximately 80 gallons of diesel fuel, making it possible for them to travel up to 550 miles on a single tank. Looking at these crime scene photos, there's not a hint of remorse. This unsub was determined and relentless, like he couldn't kill these victims enough. So the unsub knew the best way to kill them, but he stabbed them multiple times afterwards to express his rage. That looks like a ceremonial weapon of some sort. We all know that public figures like politicians can have psychopathic tendencies and the ability to hide it. You know, no history of recent head trauma. He's too old to have suffered a traditional schizophrenic break. Maybe a drug-induced psychosis? Erotomania has very little to do with sex. It's a romantic or spiritual connection that erotomanics crave. Victims of the delusion tend to be from a higher social status and have done very little to stimulate or encourage such a belief. He reads in French, but most of his own writings are in English. His handwriting is the size of courier type. The small print tells me he's methodical, not always social. The narrow spacing indicates a tremendous amount of irritability. Actually, dragging is steeped in English history. Back in the 11th century, drawing and quartering was a common form of punishment, and in fact, they would also disembowel and behead the victims when they were done with them. You know, remember sexual predator Matthew Hoffman? In 2010, he killed a mother, son, and family friend just so he could take the 13-year-old daughter. Unlike classic autism, language ability is intact in people with Asperger's. They appear to lack empathy and have trouble reading social cues. Albert Einstein supposedly had it, as do some well-known Silicon Valley types. The goal of amputation is to remove dead tissue to preserve an otherwise healthy limb. But this unsub stitched the skin flap so tightly over Tony's stump that it didn't allow for proper blood flow and led to gangrene. This amputation was transtibial, but the survivor was transfemoral. The cutting here is pristine. Nerve and vascular dissection was careful, well ligated. I mean, this unsub definitely knew what he was doing medically. I said he wasn't a surgeon, but his knowledge of anatomy and procedure shows definite medical training. Amputating the leg is not the unsub's goal. Reattaching it is. I think that's the experiment. He wants to see if he can put a foreign leg on someone else's body.
wouldn't have made any difference. I mean, gangrene and sepsis had already set in. There's nothing the hospital could have done. Garlic, green tea, vitamin D, ginger, all of these items are specifically known to boost the immune system. A side effect of radiation treatment is sores inside the mouth. In fact, doctors advise you to eat the way an infant would eat. The placenta does carry special significance in many cultures. In ancient Egypt, it had its own hieroglyph, and the Igbo tribe in Nigeria considered it to be the child's dead twin. It could be placentophagy. Consuming it in the wild, it's common for animals to eat their own afterbirth. It's super rich in nutrients. The unsub might be using the placenta as food, but nothing in the profile suggested cannibalism. I mean, when livestock die, animal carcasses turn to a useful soil amendment through the aerobic biodegradation process. You need to add a substrate high in carbon to balance the nitrogen, and one of the most efficient substrates on Earth is pure sawdust. Much like the DC snipers, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, this is a mentor-mentee relationship where the older one is attempting to teach the younger one to become a better killer. This dynamic is rare, but the symbiotic nature of their mutual desires actually strengthens their affinity for one another. It's human nature to make assumptions based on appearance. It's an outdated primal instinct born of our need to quickly assess our surroundings. Of course, in this modern era, those assumptions tend to be very wrong and often quite hurtful. Evil can't be scientifically defined. It's an illusory moral concept that doesn't exist in nature. Its origins and connotations have been inextricably linked to religion and mythology. This offender has shown no signs of any belief.
Don't forget to subscribe, follow, like and comments for updates.